He was the coolest guy in Hollywood, a movie star who loved to break the rules. But what he left behind in a dusty garage many years later surprised even his best friends. Hidden under covers and buried in time were rare motorcycles, racing plans, personal notes he wrote by hand, and a Ferrari that nobody knew he owned. This isn't just a story about cars, it's the secret story of Steve McQueen that nobody knew about until now. Way before he became the king of cool, Steve McQueen was a forgotten kid who moved from house to house. He was born in 1930 in a small town called Beech Grove, Indiana. Steve's early life was really hard and unstable. His dad was a stunt pilot who left the family when Steve was just a baby, only a few months old. His mom was very young and had problems with drinking alcohol. She left him with other family members while she tried to fix her own life out in California. For a while, McQueen lived with his great-uncle on a farm in Slater, Missouri. It was there, around tractors, tools, and dirty work clothes covered in grease, that he started loving machines and working with his hands. But by the time he became a teenager, Steve was already known as a troublemaker. He stole small things, skipped school a lot, and got in trouble with police. This got him sent to the California Junior Boys Republic, which was a school for kids who broke rules. But instead of making him worse, it actually helped him. Years later, McQueen would say that the school saved his life. He stayed connected to it forever, quietly giving them money and helping troubled teenagers. The biggest part of McQueen's childhood wasn't being rebellious, it was being alone. He learned very early not to trust people in charge and not to depend on anyone else. He kept his feelings hidden inside and only felt free when he was moving fast, racing down back roads on a borrowed motorcycle, or driving through empty fields in junk cars he put together from scrap yards. What most fans saw later in his confident, cool style on screen was actually born here, in loneliness, survival, and a strong need to be in control of his own life. And where did Steve feel most in control? Not in front of cameras, not on movie sets, but in garages, working with spark plugs, stripped bolts, and listening to the sound of a perfect engine. For Steve McQueen, the garage wasn't just a place to park cars, it was an escape, a safe space where the outsider kid became the master of his own world. Before Hollywood knew his name, Steve McQueen was trying to find his way in a world that didn't give him many chances. After reform school, he moved around a lot, working different jobs like being a towel boy, a lumberjack, and even working on oil rigs. But his decision to join the United States Marine Corps in 1947 added discipline to his rebellious nature. He became known for being both a rule breaker and a leader at the same time. Once he saved 5 other Marines by pulling them out of a sinking tank. It was the kind of brave, heroic act he never talked about, but one that showed up later in his movie roles. When he left the military, the GI Bill paid for him to go to acting school. But Steve was never really comfortable with the idea of being famous. He would often show up to acting class wearing a t-shirt covered in grease, coming straight from working on a motorcycle engine. While other young actors dreamed about walking on red carpets, McQueen spent his nights at local racetracks, fixing bikes, and racing in competitions using fake names so nobody would recognize him. He didn't want people to worship him. He just wanted to go fast and be left alone. But there was something special about him, something that movie directors couldn't ignore. His first big break came in the late 1950s, but it wasn't until a movie called The Great Escape that he truly became a household name that everyone knew. Still, while fans were watching him make movie history, Steve was watching lap times at racetracks. He made deals in his movie contracts that said he could do his own stunts. Why? Because he didn't trust anyone else to drive for him. Not with his image, and definitely not with his life. This wasn't a man who accidentally became a star. This was a man who put up with being famous, a man who used acting as a way to pay for what he truly loved doing. Racing, riding motorcycles, and building machines. The cameras might have made him famous, but it was holding a wrench in his hand that made him feel real and alive. By the 1960s, Steve McQueen was the highest-paid actor in the entire world. But while the world saw a superstar, McQueen saw himself as a mechanic who just happened to act in movies. At fancy parties, he was known to leave early and disappear. Not because he was shy, but because he wanted to get back to his garage. There he felt free. No scripts to memorize, no spotlights shining on him, just wrenches, engine parts, and the smell of gasoline. He owned over 200 vehicles at one point in his life. They ranged from rare, expensive Ferraris to beat-up old Indian motorcycles. He didn't buy them to show off to other people. In fact, many of them just sat under covers, getting a little rusty. Because for Steve, they weren't symbols to show his wealth. They were stories, machines with personality, problems, and history. A dented fender wasn't damage to him, it was personality and character. And when McQueen wasn't working with wrenches, he was racing. He raced off-road in deserts, on racetracks, and sometimes dangerously close to when he was supposed to be filming movies. During a movie called The Sand Pebbles, he reportedly flew to Japan with a motorcycle engine packed in his suitcase just so he could ride motorcycles while on set. And in a movie called Le Mans, he insisted on filming real racing footage, driving laps alongside professional race car drivers in a super-fast Porsche 917. His garage wasn't just a workshop where he fixed things, it was like his therapist's office where he dealt with his feelings. Friends like Bud Ekins, who was his legendary stunt double and closest friend, would often spend hours in the garage with him. They would talk about life, love, and racing, while their arms were deep inside an engine they were rebuilding together. Despite all the fame, the fortune and money, and all the tabloid newspaper attention, McQueen's soul stayed grounded in the simple joy of working on machines. He often said he hated Hollywood parties with fancy people, but he loved taking apart a car's transmission. In truth, the garage was the only place where he didn't have to pretend to be someone he wasn't. Steve McQueen didn't just build a career in movies, he built a group of close friends like a tribe. His friendships were as raw and real as the machines they were obsessed with working on together. At the center of this brotherhood was Bud Ekins, the stuntman who jumped the barbed wire fence in the movie The Great Escape. Even McQueen had limits on what stunts he could do. But that wasn't just a stunt double arrangement made by movie studios. That was real trust. It was born in garages, built on handshakes with greasy hands, and late-night tune-ups on motorcycles and cars. McQueen's circle of friends went beyond just Bud. He had a deep friendship with Paul Newman, another actor turned race car driver who understood the balance between movie sets and racetracks. Charles Bronson, Burt Reynolds, and James Coburn all hung out in McQueen's world from time to time. They were drawn to how real and authentic he was. They weren't sitting around talking about movie scripts or studio gossip. They were swapping out spark plugs and arguing over engine specifications and torque. Their friendship wasn't about Hollywood at all. It was about horsepower and fast cars. These men didn't need the spotlight and attention to feel important. They found real connection through hard work, busted knuckles from working on cars, and competition. Whether it was Baja off-road desert races or the Daytona racing pits, McQueen and his crew spoke the language of the garage. It was a language of respect, taking risks, and rebellion against normal life. In rare behind-the-scenes video footage, McQueen is seen handing Ekins a wrench. Not as a movie star directing a crew member, but as a friend working on a project together. Those quiet exchanges and moments said more than any newspaper headline could. They showed a man who valued loyalty and treasured time under a car hood more than time performing on a stage. This brotherhood, created in fuel and fire, would last longer than movie contracts and movie critics. Because to McQueen, his legacy wasn't built on how much money his movies made at the box office. It was built in garages alongside the men who truly understood who he really was deep inside. Steve McQueen's love life was as intense and sometimes as explosive as the engines he rebuilt and fixed. He was married 3 times. First to a Filipino actress named Neil Adams, then to Hollywood icon Ali MacGraw, and later to a model named Barbara Minty. But no matter how high profile and famous the romance was, one truth always stayed the same. The garage came first in his life. Those closest to Steve say his happiest moments were never on red carpets or on magazine covers. They were inside a dimly lit workshop, wearing jeans stained with oil, taking apart a carburetor, or tuning a 2-stroke motorcycle engine. He would spend hours alone, with his elbows deep in grease, even on anniversary nights when he should be celebrating with his wife. Nile once admitted that he could forget about the whole world for days if he had a wrench in his hand. That devotion and dedication to machines often left his romantic partners feeling left out and sidelined. Ali McGraw, after leaving her husband-to-be with McQueen, expected a passionate whirlwind romance full of excitement. What she got instead was long periods of silence, a locked garage door, and a man who often communicated more with engines than with his emotions and feelings. Friends say Ali once joked and said, "I wasn't competing with other women for his attention. I was competing with his motorcycles." The truth is, Steve wasn't trying to be cruel or mean. He was just consumed and obsessed. His obsession wasn't just with cars and motorcycles, it was with control, focus, and being alone. In a life where photographers followed his every move and movie studios told him what to do with his time, the garage was the one place where he had complete control and the final say. And while he did love deeply in his own special way, McQueen's most lasting relationship wasn't with a person. It was with horsepower and fast engines. Even in his final marriage to Barbara Minty, she recalled how Steve would sneak away from parties or interviews to go check on something in his shop. That something was usually a project he was building. It might be an old Indian Scout motorcycle needing a new timing chain, or a Porsche engine waiting to be calibrated and adjusted perfectly. The kind of thing that mattered far more to him than all the buzz and excitement of Hollywood ever could. Steve McQueen didn't just play race car drivers on movie screens. He was actually one in real life. Racing wasn't a hobby or a role he prepared for in movies. It was the way he saw and understood the entire world. He once said, "Racing is life. Anything before or after is just waiting around." That wasn't just a cool line for a movie. That was his personal belief, like a religious scripture. From motorcycles to Le Mans prototype race cars, McQueen threw himself into every level of motorsport racing. He raced off-road in the Mojave Desert, tore through Baja in four-wheel drive dune buggies, and risked everything on paved racetracks behind the wheel of high-performance machines. He even competed in a famous race called the 12 Hours of Sebring in 1970 with a broken foot. He finished second place overall alongside a Formula One racing legend named Peter Revson. That wasn't a publicity stunt for cameras, that was Steve McQueen, out-racing professional drivers on pure skill and guts and bravery. His garage showed this obsession clearly. It wasn't a fancy showroom with shiny cars on display. It was a race preparation bunker and war room. There were stacks of tuning logs, spark gap measurements, and lap time notes scribbled in the margins of his movie scripts. One corner of the garage had shelves filled with helmets, gloves, and goggles. They were still covered and caked in dust from desert racing trials. Another section was saved just for his beloved motorcycles. Triumphs, Huskies, and rare vintage collector bikes. Each one was battle-tested from real racing, not babied and kept perfect. He demanded mechanical perfection, but not from his crew of helpers. He demanded it from himself. He would stay up until early morning, dialing in suspension geometry or testing how well the brakes performed on back roads. No entourage of people following him, no camera crew filming. Just Steve and the machine working together as one. Hollywood movie studios couldn't understand it and didn't like it. Studios hated how racing got in the way of filming schedules for movies. Insurance companies warned him constantly that he could get hurt, but Steve refused to slow down at all. Because slowing down meant losing himself and who he really was. And McQueen wasn't made for going slow or taking it easy. He was made for speed. When Steve McQueen passed away and died in 1980 at just 50 years old, a storm of sadness and grief swept across Hollywood. But behind all the mourning and media news coverage, something quieter and far more personal was happening behind the scenes. His private garage, tucked away hidden in California, was sealed shut. It wasn't looted by thieves, it wasn't sold to collectors. It was locked tight, as if time itself had been paused and frozen inside those walls. The garage wasn't some polished showroom filled with collectors' plaques and fancy velvet ropes separating the cars. It was a real working shop. It was chaotic, dusty, and deeply personal to who Steve was. Friends say Steve wanted it kept exactly the way it was when he left it. Tools were scattered everywhere, bikes were in the middle of being repaired, parts catalogues were bookmarked with pages marked by grease stains. And that's exactly how it stayed for decades and decades. The responsibility to protect it and keep it safe fell to trusted family members who loved him. They respected Steve's unspoken rule that the garage was sacred and special. Journalists and reporters were kept out and not allowed in. Collectors begged to see what was hidden inside, but no one got into. See it. It became a legend and mystery. A sealed time capsule of America's greatest gearhead and car lover. Stories began spreading and circulating among people. Some claimed there was a lost Porsche 356 prototype hidden inside. Others swore he had hidden handwritten race diaries from his Le Mans movie shoot. But no one really knew the truth because the people who did know the truth weren't talking about it to anyone. The outside of the garage grew over with vines and weeds as nature took over. But the inside of it remained completely untouched, just exactly as he had left it on his last day there. The silence inside those walls wasn't abandonment or forgetting about it. It was preservation and protection of something precious. And in that stillness and quiet, a question hung in the air and lingered. What would they find when the door finally opened after all these years? It didn't happen with cameras rolling and news crews present. There was no press release sent to newspapers, no movie studio involvement at all. Just a small team of people, hand-picked by the family, stepping through the heavy metal doors of Steve McQueen's sealed garage for the first time in over 40 years. The air inside was stale and old. The light was dim and dark. But what they found when they looked around stopped them cold in their tracks and took their breath away. The first thing they noticed was the smell in the air. Gasoline, old motor oil, aged leather, and layers of dust everywhere. The second thing was the stillness of everything, as if McQueen had just stepped out to grab a tool from another room and simply never came back or returned. Cobwebs hung from vintage Ducati motorcycle frames like curtains. Workbenches were frozen in time, stopped mid-project. A partially restored Indian motorcycle still had its gas tank removed and sitting beside the bike. A pair of work gloves were resting right beside it, as if waiting for hands to pick them up again. But the real treasures and discoveries were layered deeper inside, hidden further back. In a back corner of the garage, hidden under heavy canvas tarps and covers, sat memorabilia and items that no one knew still existed anywhere in the world. There were helmets from the 6 days trials races, racing boots stained with mud from Baja Desert races. There was a worn Le Mans racing jacket with McQueen's name barely visible anymore on the collar, faded with time. And then they found a wooden crate marked only with his initials, carved or written on top. Inside the crate were reels of film, personal footage from test drives he did privately. There were unseen behind-the-scenes moments from the movies Bullitt and Le Mans that no one had ever watched before. And there was a film clip labeled in handwriting, Desert Run, Bud, Me and Bronson 74, referring to a private trip in 1974. And then there were spiral notebooks stacked carefully in a steel locker. They were filled with handwritten thoughts, racetrack notes, tuning logs for engines, and quotes scribbled like mantras and personal mottos. Speed is truth, one page read. No director understands a throttle, said another. This is who I am, read a third. To those people standing there that day, it wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a journal and diary, a spiritual vault of a man whose public image had always been slick, smooth, and cool to the outside world. But here, right here in this space, this was the real Steve McQueen. Unfiltered, raw, mechanical, and entirely human without any pretending. Near the back wall, half buried under tarps and old racing banners from motorcycle brands like Triumph and Husqvarna, was a car that none of them expected to find sitting there. It wasn't written down in any catalogue or list. It wasn't insured by any insurance company, and it didn't appear in any official McQueen collection list that anyone had ever seen before. But the unmistakable curves of the body beneath all the dust told them instantly and immediately. This was no ordinary machine or regular car. They had just discovered a Ferrari 275G TB/4. This is arguably one of the rarest and most desirable Ferrari cars ever built in history. But this particular one was different and special. It had no VIN records or registration tied to Steve's name. There was no license plate attached to it at all. It was as if the car had been intentionally hidden away from the world. Whispers and rumors from McQueen's inner circle of close friends suggested he got the car privately during or after the Le Mans movie shoot in Europe. Some people even claim it was a quiet gift from a European car collector, someone who knew Steve personally. A car so special, so deeply personal, that Steve kept it completely away from the spotlight and public eye, hidden from everyone. This particular Ferrari 275 had subtle custom touches that showed Steve's personal hand. There were racing harness mounts installed for safety. There was an aftermarket switchboard added. There was a custom-stitched leather pouch mounted under the dashboard. Inside the pouch were track maps from racetracks and handwritten gear ratios, presumably written from Steve's own hand and mind. The engine was untouched and hadn't been taken apart, but it was lovingly preserved with great care. No fluids had been drained out, no parts had been scavenged or stolen away. It was like finding a ghost from the past, frozen in time, just sitting there waiting patiently to be found by someone. Even the concrete floor around the car told a story if you looked closely. There were faint tire marks where it had once been parked regularly, but now long faded away with time. Dust had outlined its silhouette on the ground, like a chalk outline of a body at a crime scene in detective movies. Car collectors now estimate the car could sell for and fetch over $30 million at an auction today. But those people who found it that day knew deep down this wasn't about money or dollar signs. It was a final, defiant secret that Steve kept. A personal trophy that meant something to him. Steve never wanted praise or attention from others. He just wanted things protected and kept safe, hidden away from a world that always wanted a piece of him. Long after the newspaper headlines faded away and the film credits stopped rolling on movie screens, Steve McQueen's true story didn't sit in Hollywood archives or museum displays. It sat in that garage, covered in layers of dust, hidden behind padlocks and chains, preserved in grease, chrome metal, and complete silence. Because Steve didn't chase fame or celebrity status. He chased freedom and the feeling of being truly free. And the garage was the one place where he caught it and held on to it. What they found inside wasn't just hardware, tools, and machines. It was heart and soul. His soul was etched into tire treads and handwritten specifications. Every scratched and nicked wrench, every grease-stained page of notes, every half-finished build told you the exact same thing. This wasn't a movie star's workshop for show. This was a sanctuary, a holy place for him. In a world that tried to make him a brand and a product to sell, McQueen found refuge in anonymity and being unknown. No cameras watching, no agents managing him, just pistons, petrol, and peace of mind. The garage was where he could disappear from everything, and in that disappearance from the world, he became most himself, his truest self. Today, much of what was found is being carefully catalogued for preservation to protect it for history. Some items will go to museums for people to see, some will remain in the hands of his family members, kept private. But the story those walls told, that story is now public for everyone to hear and know. The world now sees McQueen not as a Hollywood icon on a pedestal, but as a builder, a racer, a man who turned wrenches with his hands to make sense of a world that moved too fast sometimes, and sometimes not fast enough for him. As the dust finally settled on everything, one truth became crystal clear to everyone there. Steve McQueen never really left the garage at all. He became it and merged with it. Every tool, every turn of the key, every roar of an engine in that space was him forever.